Welcome everyone to this webinar on the Global Stocktake. I propose that we wait just a little bit more, 30 seconds to 1 minute, and then we will start. Okay, to not lose valuable time, I think we can start now. Welcome everyone to this webinar on the Global Stocktake, and more specifically a Global Stocktake informed by human rights. I am Lien from the Center for International Environmental Law, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Just as an introduction, as I'm sure you all know, the Paris Agreement established the Global Stocktake as a periodic process to review the ambition of climate action. And the first Global Stocktake is held in 2022 and 2023. And it's of critical importance to assess the progress in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and its broader societal objectives. And for this reason, and because we are almost going into the UNFCCC sessions in Bonn, we are organizing this webinar to inform stakeholders about the process and also about the importance of and the possibilities for human rights integration in the Global Stocktake. We have an excellent panel today discussing the opportunities not only for civil society, of course, but also for governments, UN agencies, and civil society and Indigenous peoples representatives to provide input to ensure that human rights dimensions are considered in the Global Stocktake. And before we start and I introduce you to our panelists, I just wanted to share some numbers. As I'm sure will be mentioned later, there was a first round of submissions or call for submissions on the Global Stocktake earlier this year. And of course, numbers are just numbers, but still in the 67 submissions that were made, we found 162 explicit mentions of human rights, but they were all coming from 12 submissions, of which unfortunately only one was a party submission. And next to that, we also briefly searched for mentions of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities, and there they were also mentioned in a handful of submissions, but none of those submissions came from states. So I would say this webinar is very timely to discuss how we can make sure that in further submissions and in the discussions that will be happening in Bonn in June, human rights are effectively integrated and considered in the Global Stocktake. So I will present the panelists one by one before their interventions, and I will start with Ms. Cecilia Kinutia Nyenga, who is the Director on Intergovernmental Support and Collective Progress Division, of the UNFCCC, and she will give an introduction to the process, so the Global Stocktake process, and also talk about entry points for stakeholder engagement in the process. Cecilia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you very much actually for inviting us, the UNFCCC Secretariat, to participate in this conversation. This is really crucial, and given the importance that the United Nations has placed on the need to integrate and take into recognition human rights as being very central to ensuring socio-economic, political development, including making it a key central element in the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe the Global Stocktake is very well positioned to amplify and articulate the importance of having human rights really at the heart of not only the UNFCCC process, but as we move towards collective action and assessing how far we have gone since the Paris Agreement, but more importantly, looking into the future. As you all very well know, the Paris Agreement is a legally binding agreement under the UNFCCC for parties. And it has three main elements. First is limiting the global temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees with pre-industrial levels. Secondly is around increasing the ability to adapt and to the adverse impacts of climate change and also to foster climate resilience. And thirdly, to enhance climate finance and the means of implementation and support for climate action. The Paris Agreement is a 5-yearly cyclical process, and it's built-in ratchet mechanism for increased ambition, which is really the Global Stocktake. And starting in 2020, parties provided their nationally determined contributions to communicate their intended actions on mitigation and adaptation. In this context, therefore, the Global Stocktake aims firstly to assess the collective progress under the Paris Agreement towards achieving its purpose and its long-term goal. And here I'd like to emphasize, yes, we can look at gaps, but I think more importantly is to see how we can have in place robust solutions to address the fundamental climate change challenges that society continues to achieve, and therefore also have a very forward-looking approach. Secondly, is to identify opportunities for enhanced action and support in recognition that higher ambition is a function of both urgency and opportunity. The Global Stocktake will conclude in 2023 at COP28, which will be held in the United Arab Emirates. And this will provide recommendations on moving forward, informing parties in updating and enhancing their NDCs, and also enhancing international cooperation for climate action. And I'd ask that I add here also very importantly, ensuring that all members of society, indigenous people, non-party stakeholders, civil society, communities, women, youth also play a significant role in this process. In 2025, countries will then provide revised national determined considerations, contributions, and the cycle will repeat itself. The GST therefore offers an opportunity to support the transition from negotiation to implementation and cooperation. And indeed, as we converse with Egypt, that is organizing the COP27, they have highlighted that COP27 will indeed be the COP that will really focus on implementation and seeking solutions. So let's look at the themes of the Global Stocktake. They cover various thematic areas. Firstly is mitigation, and in this case, looking at the state of greenhouse gas emissions by source and also by removal. Secondly, looking at around mitigation efforts undertaken by parties, as well as the overall effects of parties' nationally determined contributions, and also make progress made towards implementation of the mitigation actions. The second package of thematic area is around adaptation, and this includes the state of adaptation efforts, the support, the experiences and priorities, as well as observed and projected climate change risks. Third is around means of implementation and support, and this includes financial flows, mobilization and provision of financial support, including the 100 billion that was promised, and technology development transfer, as well as capacity building efforts. The Global Stocktake is also required to take into account, as appropriate, efforts related to the work that address the social and economic consequences and impacts of response measures. And secondly, avert, minimize, and address loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. The GST process as a whole is based on the principle of equity and best available science. And therefore, we are really aligning the discussions, particularly the upcoming technical dialogues, to the latest reports by the IPCC from Working Group 1 to 3, but also importantly, other processes that will be critical in informing our process and ensuring equity. Decision 19 of the CMA1 sets the modalities of the Global Stocktake. And here there are 3 phases. The first, as was mentioned, is the information collection and preparation, the gathering and compiling and synthesizing information. And as was mentioned, we have received a number of inputs. We would like to receive much more inputs, and therefore, although the dates close, we are still encouraging further inputs into this portal. The second area is the technical assessment, which is basically during the upcoming subsidiary body session, we will be setting off with the first technical dialogue, and this will be assessing the technical assessment process will include assessing collective progress, including information analysis and meetings of the technical dialogue. The technical dialogue, the first technical dialogue, for instance, happening in June, will work through a focused exchange of views, information, and ideas in sessions of roundtables and other activities on the three thematic areas. The third phase of work will be with regard to the consideration of outputs. And this phase will focus on discussing the implications of the findings of the technical assessment with a view to achieving the outcome of the GST of informing parties in updating and enhancing their climate actions and support. The subsidiary body chairs have provided guiding questions for each component. And if you haven't seen that, we can share that with you. And they have already produced a non-paper outlining the approach for the information collection and preparation component and guiding questions for this component. Again, we can share this with you. The information note is available on our website, and this will be made available to you. And my colleague Paloma can, of course, share the link here. The Global Stocktake officially, of course, started at CMA 3, and it will conclude, as I said, in 2023. I will not go repeating again, as I've already elaborated on the process, but here I'd like to highlight that the consideration of outputs will take place at CMA session in 2023, and this will be complemented by high-level events and a decision of declaration as expected during this session. The GST process also includes negotiations at the 4 sessions of the SPs after Glasgow through a joint working group. And in this upcoming session, SP session in June, there will also be contact groups to address areas that require further negotiations on the GST. I think as I move towards my concluding this session, my statement is I'd like to mention here that the GST is indeed crucial. It is a crucial process, and it needs to make sure that we accomplish our shared goals, including that of integrating and making sure that human rights are central to this process. We need to keep 1.5 alive, and that really has to do everything with a human rights approach. We need to strengthen the adaptive capacity and resilience of vulnerable communities. We need to enhance and live to the promise of climate finance and the support that would be required in order for us to successfully implement the Paris Agreement. The GST will contribute to our compliance of the Paris Agreement targets. Yes, firstly, by identifying gaps, challenges, and best practices that will contribute to enhance ambition and accelerate implementation, but more importantly, to address the fundamental issues and the principles of equity and leaving no one behind should also be part and parcel of the package in which we undertake this process. The GST is a comprehensive and facilitative process, and it's designed, and I'm really excited that it will be all-encompassing, engaging a broad range of actors to catalyze action. And indeed, the way we are planning the technical dialogues is to create those spaces that will allow a robust exchange, not only for parties, but also non-party stakeholders to engage actively in this process. To be successful, the GST process needs to be inclusive, and all stakeholders must engage actively and take ownership of the process. That's really indeed our wish and our promise. This was reinforced in Glasgow with a call from the CMA3 to the high-level champions to support effective participation of non-party stakeholders in the GST. So in closing, I'm inviting you to engage with the process, contribute to fighting climate change. First, observers, non-party stakeholders, you have been invited to make submissions in written inputs prior to all the 3 meetings of the technical dialogue. Please take an active role and respond to our call. Your inputs will inform the thematic areas based on equity, as I said, and the best available science. And although the first call for inputs was concluded, there is a possibility to update and add new information. We want more information than the current inputs that were mentioned here by Lee, 12 on human rights. We need more sound bites and more action around this issue so that it can be central in the processes of implementation. We would, for civil society, there is a call for expression of interest to participate in the GST technical dialogues, and it is out until tomorrow, actually tomorrow, the 19th of July. And we will provide you again the link to our website so that you can register your interest to participate. There will also be a consultation with the SP chairs and technical dialogue co-facilitators. Paloma has already, I believe, posted the information, and this session will be to hear feedback on the approach of the dialogue, as well as to provide further information on the recently published information by our co-facilitators. So anyone can engage intersessionally on a voluntary basis. And this kind of meeting, for instance, where you've convened is one example, and making linkages to it and the entire formal process will be very, very crucial. And therefore, I'd like to end here by again amplifying that we really welcome this collaboration, and we look forward to all of you and engaging in the Global Stocktake process with you in order to bring us closer to sustainable, low emission, and resilient future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very clear presentation and for reiterating the importance of human rights in the Global Stocktake, and also really encouraging everyone to engage meaningfully in the Global Stocktake process. So thank you so much for this presentation. Maybe for our audience, Mrs. Kinuti Anyanga has to leave after her presentation, so she will not be able to answer questions later, but her colleague Paloma will still be present. So if there's questions about the process, please do not hesitate to still ask them. And more generally, as we have many panelists and only 1 hour, I would also encourage everyone to just use the Q&A to ask written questions, and the panelists do have access to the Q&A, so can answer those questions in writing. And of course, if there is still time after the interventions, we will also ask the questions orally. But I would really encourage you to use the Q&A function of this webinar. So thank you again, Ms. Kinuti Anyanga. I will now go to the next speaker on the panel, who is Marine Pouget. She's the International Climate Governance Advisor of Climate Action Network France, and she also coordinates the working group of Climate Action Network on the Global Stocktake. And so she will give some insights from a CSO perspective on what the expectations are of CSOs for the Global Stocktake in general, and also specifically for the session in June. So thank you so much, Marine. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lian, and hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss on the Global Stocktake. So I can give you, as Lian just suggested, an overview about how we as Climate Action Network are approaching this process generally, and also how we prepare this for this June session and for the year maybe more generally. So as it was explained just before, the Global Stocktake is for us a high accountability and political moment inside the UNFCCC governance. It is for us the guardian of the Paris Agreement. This is the way we have to see and be sure that the Paris Agreement is implemented. And it must serve as a mean to guide the urgent realignment we need of the NDCs and raise up ambition so that we are still on track to achieve the 1.5 degree scenario. So this is about climate ambition, and it is about saving nature, saving livelihoods and cultures, and also saving lives. So for us, it's a technical exercise that is extremely needed, but it is also a high political moment that we really want to invest in because again, this is the mechanism that can lead us to, or at least show us how to stay in the Paris promises that parties ratified. So really, we really need the mobilization of decision makers and parties around this event, as well as non-state actors. I will come to this as well, but for us, this is really a moment for everyone, for the entire climate community who is engaged toward the Paris Agreement. And on another note, before I go to the specifics of the June session, the Global Stocktake is for civil society process that's for the moment, and we hope and we think it will stay that way, that really able the participation of so many actors. It's extremely inclusive at its core, which is not extremely easy in the climate governance at the international level. We had already some processes such as the Talanoa dialogue, where we had so many actors not only meeting in this very formal negotiation format, we know, with parties discussing and observers sitting, but really co-constructing something together. So we really thought this is not happening very often, and we have to use it as civil society to be in the conversation and the exchanges that will be conducted in this process. Now, going to how we prepare for BSP's 56. So we know that this is the first meeting of the technical dialogue, was explained also before on how this whole process is divided in several collection of informations, assessments. So we are getting in the assessment phase now. So we see this meeting as an opportunity for gathering for the first time all the GST possible contributors, and really try to create a common understanding on what is our vision for the concrete outcomes of this process. So for us, the June sessions are proposing two opportunities. One is to really start this assessment and technical exercise that is extremely important, and we as civil society will be part of it. We had, as CAN, we had two seats on the several roundtables that are organized, so we can be at least part of 2/3 of the conversation, and we will try to organize with other observers who can reach to the tables or the events we can't attend. So we will try to really be everywhere we can in this technical process, but we also think this is the moment maybe to start already thinking a bit beyond the technical assessment and already preparing parties and others on the political aspect of the Global Stocktake. We have three key recommendations, or at least areas of work for this June session. The first one is that we really hope that this June session will be a way to suggest concrete ideas to put in place support for developing countries and civil society observers from the Global South. We saw we had some exchanges with several delegations in the last weeks, and we realized that quite an important number of parties from the Global South are still struggling to be fully part of the technical assessment process because they don't have the necessary data, human resources, time, or any reporting mechanism they would need to fully contribute to the information collection of the Global Stocktake. And we think this could be a problem for the legitimacy of the process, right? If it's assessing only half of the word, well, it could be problematic. And we have also colleagues from NGOs on the Global South, but also representing youth organizations, women organizations, or indigenous people communities, who also have quite a lot of struggle to be able to submit submissions and be part of the technical process. So we we know this problem has been raised before, but it was not very present in Glasgow. But now it should at least come back from the few delegations we could meet. So we hope next to the technical assessment, we will have that kind of conversation on how to be sure that this is in place, and we hope that for COP27 we would have a way forward. The second pillar of work would be working on the accountability of non-party stakeholders, and use the Global Stocktake maybe to propose a moment where, of course, this is a process that is completely focused on parties, and this is right so. And we think this is the pure objectives of the Global Stocktake. But we think that can also be a moment where non-party stakeholders are not only part of the construction of the process, but can also be assessed. Maybe you are aware that inside the UNFCCC there is a non-party space, so we can call it like that. It is called the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, where you have climate initiatives with subnational actors, but also banks, companies, NGOs, foundations, etc., who are engaging in front of the UNFCCC during COPs or others, or on an online portal for climate. And we think probably the Global Stocktake is also a moment to address an assessment, at least, of this kind of initiatives as well. This is also a pillar for mitigation and ambition, right? Of course, parties have to regulate climate policies, but they also need to know what is possible on the side of the other actors of the society. So we hope that during this SP session, we will have some discussions with the team from the Marrakesh Partnership, but also with the UNFCCC and parties on how we can think about a format where the GST is also about climate action and on the non-state party side. Yeah, and I just the last pillar of work we are thinking of for June is just to make sure that the inclusion of the process is still so broad as it is. This is a first test, so we are going with really this will to try to see if it's working, if we can as observer really engage, or if we are still struggling. So this is a test, but at least we will assess that and see at the end of the process is that if that worked well, if the format of the roundtables were really a good way for us to participate. And to finish my intervention, maybe for those of you who are part of the civil society side and who are just thinking about, oh, that sounds great, but how can I really engage on this Global Stocktake? You have the whole technical side we talked about, like send submissions and inputs, for example, especially maybe on topics you think are still maybe not very well covered by the Global Stocktake. But you can also use the Global Stocktake outside of the UNFCCC sphere. And this is what we are trying to do as CAN, for example. This is a great tool for political pressure at the national level, to motivate your party to implement better and faster. And the GST can be a pillar, or at least a motivator, and say, well, this is coming. So maybe you should prepare to that. So yeah, it can be really used in advocacy, it can be used in mobilization, for example, organize events, campaign, raise awareness among NGOs, but also parties on this process. So yeah, I think this is really a tool that can, I mean, a mechanism more like that, it could be used also outside for your own purposes and the activities you are maybe doing outside of this UNFCCC technical sphere. So yeah, I think that's it from my side. I thank you so much for your attention and happy to answer to questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Marine, for really clearly giving the key pillars for CSO engagement in June and in general in the Global Stocktake, and for also giving that very concrete tip for how to engage with your own parties and in the Global Stocktake. I would also again encourage people to ask questions in the Q&A, because we are already a little bit over time, so I'm afraid there will not be a lot of time for an oral Q&A. And I would also encourage the next speakers to really stick to the 10 minutes for their presentation, to make sure that we can hear everyone that is expected to speak today. So the next speaker is Victoria Toli-Corpus, who is the founder and director of Tebteba Foundation, but also a former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples. And so she will talk about the importance of integrating Indigenous science and Indigenous peoples' rights in the global stocktake. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for organizing this event. I think it's very important that this event is really looking at how human rights is going to be integral to the global stocktake. And it's very concerning for me that, you know, as you were mentioning earlier in the assessment that you have done so far, very few have even included human rights in the reports, as well as, of course, Indigenous peoples, no? And that's to be expected in a way, but still we would like to really see the global stocktake to be taken seriously by the parties, and to ensure that indeed the economic and social consequences, no, of doing all these mitigation adaptation actions on climate change are really being looked into and addressed, you know. And so that's for us, for Indigenous peoples, that's our we have several areas where we think we can really we would like to see more about this written on. First, of course, is the whole issue of human rights. You know, this is what we are talking about now. Clearly, Indigenous peoples' contributions to achieving climate change mitigation and to be able to adapt effectively is when their human rights are respected. No, these human rights include, among others, of course, the right to their lands and territories and resources, and I'll not go into detail in that because I know that Elaine is going to talk about this, but also the right to participate, as well as the right to self-determination, to determine the kind of development that we would like to have, whether this is social, economic, or cultural development. And, you know, when I was looking at the whole framework of the global stocktake, as well as the materials prepared by the Secretariat, and of course, this refers to also both the economic and social consequences, but as well the approaches, you know, the things that the transition, no, the transition to a low carbon economic development, as well as the just transition that will really allow for us to be able to address this problem. And for Indigenous peoples, we see that as an opportunity for the states to really look at the more sustainable production and consumption systems and lifestyles of Indigenous peoples, because this is what allowed us to contribute effectively to the problem of biodiversity loss, as well as climate change mitigation. And our philosophical views, our cultures, as well as our lifestyles are things that really need to be acknowledged, as well as the knowledge that we have in sustaining these ecosystems to be more viable and to be more sustainable. I think all these are important to be integrated in the global stocktake. No, they should take a look at indeed what are the contributions that are given by Indigenous peoples, by women, no, by all the other, by non-government organizations, because this is going to matter when you look at the overall, because they said this is supposed to be comprehensive. So indeed, that kind of comprehensivity should include all these different elements. And it's, I don't know, I think that maybe with your help and the Climate and Human Rights Network, we will be able to come up with some steps that need to be taken to ensure that human rights is really integrated into what the countries are submitting. even in the right to participate, which is a right of everybody, of course, is really not very much respected. So, you can see this when the nationally determined contributions and even the national adaptation plans are being made. No, and I think that that's one of the aims that non-party uh, actors should do. How do you make sure that the governments really include us when they are talking about this? And of course, in the reports in the Global Stocktake, I think the really the big issue is the kind of the seriousness of governments in really working towards a low carbon economic development, you know, uh, and not just continue with business as usual. What we see in many countries is that there are efforts to shift towards renewable energy, no, but the support that's needed for even communities themselves, many of our indigenous communities are doing what they can to shift towards renewable energy development, but the support that is needed is not there, no. So on our own, as organizations, we generate support from consultants, from engineers who know how to put this up, and then we get their services pro bono to help the communities, and so I think that for most indigenous communities, that's the situation. But the governments in their programs, they say that of course renewable energy, waste management, transportation, etc., these are the areas where they can really do some things. But when I look at the map, the report that they have in terms of what has been how the state of global emissions, they are still increasing. In the data that I saw from the secretariat, they said that the emissions are still increasing, and so what is it that we need to do to make sure that these emissions are really going down, and all the measures and the technologies that are needed to undertake these measures are provided. I saw that that's one of the problems. The technology transfer and development is not also being provided. The kinds of technologies that are being floated around are technologies that are not are that we some of us don't agree to. So they should consult people on what kinds of technologies are acceptable to them, are appropriate to their own particular circumstances. And for indigenous peoples, that's what we are asking. First of all, we have our own indigenous science and technologies, and we would like these technologies and science to also be acknowledged and supported. No, so that's one proposal of indigenous people. Secondly, we also know the value of modern technologies that can help, but for us to be able to use that, we have to be able to access these technologies. No, and accessing these technologies is not an easy thing. Of course, accessing the finances is another thing. All this fall under the means of implementation, and as it is right now, I don't think that that these are really made readily available for people or even for countries who need them. We still face a lot of problems in terms of intellectual property rights issues, patents and all that. Therefore these technologies are inaccessible. So it's the right of it's our right to access those technologies as well as to have the resources to build our own capacities. No, even if the governments are not doing what they want, what they need to do to be able to enhance their capacities, communities and organizations can do that on their own. So I think that in conclusion, I would just like to say that we are not we see that it's still very inadequate, the inclusion of human rights and indigenous knowledge in the reports that are there so far. We would indeed want to be part of these technical dialogues or whatever dialogues that are going to be taken. So there is going to be an Indigenous Peoples Caucus meeting, I think tomorrow, and that will be something that we will be discussing, who is going to take part. And we want to also ensure that in developing the low carbon economic development plans, that indigenous peoples' own concepts and practices of development and resource management be recognized and supported by state parties. So those are just few of the points I would like to share. And thanks again for organizing this.
Thank you for your intervention, for your very clear and elaborate overview of why it is important to not only include indigenous science and technologies, but also to really look at how current technologies are being accessible to everyone. And of course, also the importance of participation, not only to this global stocktake, but also to all the processes that are related to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So thank you very much for this intervention. And then I will go to our last panelist, who is Alain Fréchette, the director of Strategic Analysis and Global Engagement of the Rights and Resource Institute. And as already briefly mentioned by Victoria, Alain will speak about the importance of looking at land tenure rights in the global stocktake. Alain, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lien, and thank you to my colleagues for the wonderful presentations and for allowing me to be part of this group today. I'd like to briefly explain why the importance of land tenure rights in the context of global stocktake and what can be done about it. So in summary, I think there are 4 key points on the importance of land rights vis-a-vis the global stocktake. First, land rights are fundamental to the realization of nearly all human rights. Access to use of and control over land affects the rights to life-sustaining prerequisites such as food, water, health, shelter, and broader social, cultural, economic, and political considerations. And they're also fundamentally linked to the rights of Indigenous peoples to their traditional lands, territories, and resources, including their rights to free, prior, and informed consent. Second, environmental sustainability, including climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity conservation, sustainable food production, all depend on the recognition and protection of tenure rights, including state obligations to realize, respect, protect, fulfill, and uphold such rights. And in the context of our current global environmental crisis, the key to transformative change undoubtedly resides in the legal recognition and protection of collective land and resource rights. Specifically, more than 2 billion people comprised of Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, and traditional communities hold customary rights to over half of the global landmass, but less than 1/5 of that area is legally recognized by states, rendering them and their lands vulnerable to insatiable demands of our global economic system. An overwhelming body of evidence now shows that landscapes that are legally owned and governed by communities exhibit lower rates of deforestation, store more carbon, are better protected, hold more biodiversity, and generate more benefits for more people than lands managed by either private or public entities. Third, and related to this previous point, most of the lands and territories targeted for greenhouse gas mitigation, biodiversity conservation, overlap with community lands and territories. As noted in the recent RI analysis of 31 tropical forest countries containing at least 62% of the so-called natural climate solutions identified by McKinsey, half of the lands managed by communities in these countries have yet to be legally recognized by governments. Less than 1/3 of the countries reviewed had legal frameworks that support community rights to carbon in their lands and forests, and only 5 had benefit sharing plans, and even fewer had established grievance redress mechanisms. Similarly, research by RI shows that more than 1.8 billion people stand to be affected by the expansion of protected areas and new conservation measures called for in the global post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And at least 300 million people live in areas targeted for forest landscape restoration. What all of this means is that a lot of people will be affected by ongoing initiatives to utilize land to achieve nature-based solutions, and without proper recognition of their rights, they stand to be affected. The failure to recognize and protect customary rights thus risk undermining the realization of global environmental economic priorities, unravels social, political, economic stability. Land rights are fundamental to the prerequisites of democracy, and in the absence of such assurances, we will risk increasing conflict, violence, poverty, migration, and land degradation everywhere. How have land rights been integrated in the nationally determined contributions to date? Our reviews in 2016 and 2020 reveal that fewer than 25 out of the 165 submissions reference non-binding commitments to advance or uphold rights to Indigenous peoples, local communities, and women within these groups. And only one, which was Cambodia at the time, had quantifiable targets to advance such rights. More recent review of 31 most important tropical forest countries reveal that at least 10 presented non-binding support to Indigenous community rights, but only one, Nepal, had quantifiable targets. Interestingly, Cambodia appears to have backtracked from previous commitments, and other countries have likewise reduced their claims in terms of what they expect to achieve regarding their commitments to communities and the recognition of their land rights. More broadly, land rights have simply not been a priority of the international community to date. A recent study by the Rainforest Foundation Norway showed that less than 1% of total climate financing from the past decade has gone to support Indigenous and local community initiatives, and only a fraction of this was dedicated to securing their collective land and resource rights. So what does this mean for the global stocktake? I think there are 5 key takeaways that we can consider. First, the science is clear. To achieve global climate and biodiversity goals, we must first dramatically improve the protection and sustainable use of our living world and bring an end to all activities directly or indirectly impinging on this. But in order to get there, we must first protect the sovereignty and dignity of Indigenous peoples, local communities over their lands, their knowledge, and the values they hold. Second, we must, most tropical forest countries have legislative instruments that could facilitate the legal recognition of community-based tenure rights. And we now have the tools and instruments needed to characterize such opportunities and scale them up. Building concrete targets and commitments is feasible and realistic for most countries. Third, there's now unprecedented support for land rights and across the world. At COP26, donors and philanthropies pledged $1.7 billion to accelerate the recognition of land rights, but we still need more instruments to ensure that the money goes where it matters. That is, in the hands of Indigenous peoples and local communities and women within these groups. Making these clear and known is essential to triggering country commitments. Fourth, many of the most influential companies and investors behind the demand for nature-based solutions are acutely aware of the risks posed by insecure land rights and are eager to work with civil society, rights holders, and governments to ensure that this gets supported. They can help catalyze government action, and more needs to be done to support such processes. Fifth, we now have increasingly robust guidance, such as the Land Rights Standard, to support rights-based approaches in the context of climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development action. And we can use those instruments to effectively inform governments on things they can do to realize and advance such rights. And then finally, we all have a role to play in ensuring that land tenure rights are featured prominently in the commitments that countries are making. And to this, I'd like to refer to all of the wonderful, insightful comments that my colleagues made on ways that we can all engage and support these processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very clear presentation on why land tenure rights matter so much to effective climate action, and therefore also should be taken into account in the global stocktake, and by ending with 5 very concrete points on how and why this should be taken into account in the global stocktake. So thank you so much for that. So after this panel of presentations, we also have a last intervention to start off the discussion, but I'm not entirely sure whether there will be room for a discussion anymore. But in any case, I would like to present you to Ashwini Prabha, who will share some perspectives on the Talanoa dialogue, because she was part of the team of the Fiji presidency of COP23. And so she has some lessons learned to share with us on the Talanoa dialogue, with a specific focus on public participation and also human rights integration in that process. So thank you, Ashwini. The floor is yours.
Vinaka, thank you. Bula Vinaka, namaste, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world right now. So given we have very short time, I just want to share two highlights. So Talanoa Dialogue, many of you hopefully have heard of it and know about the principles and the concept around it. And it was really designed as a tool to bring in a bottom-up approach to the UNFCCC process, and also bring in grassroots voices and sort of frontline communities into the UNFCCC process. And everything that I've heard so far from different speakers is showing that the voices of the frontline communities are not making it out there in the way that we would hope it to be registered into the Global Stocktake or even the UNFCCC process globally. So what we did as COP presidency, COP21 presidency, we had organized a dialogue with the CSOs at the COP itself, where the 9 constituencies came together and presented different views and different perspectives at the COP. But also then there was a 1-year process where there were submissions made, like 200 submissions came, and about 160 or so of them were actually from CSO groups. So that showed that there was really this appetite from the CSOs to contribute and dialogue, basically, and discuss and bring their issues. And this was for the presidency a way to bring contribution from the CSOs to the Global Stocktake. So there was like the whole design of it was meant to be working in this way. And that was a 1-year process. So what I think the lesson learned for us and what we would propose to this community out here is to use that model as a tool and ask perhaps UNFCCC to revive it, get the other presidencies, be it the Egypt presidency or the future ones, to actually take that on board and restart that process. Because since that 1 year, there hasn't been the dialogue going on and the submissions coming from the grassroots communities, etc., to bring their visions into the Stocktake process in that kind of a concrete way, where the presidency is held accountable to synthesize and then submit those concerns to the UNFCCC Stocktake, etc. So that is the key thing that we would like to share, is to use the way that the Talanoa dialogue was designed, use it as a tool and get other presidencies to actually hold those dialogues at the COPs, at the intersessionals, and perhaps in somehow the champions, the climate champions own it and make sure that that becomes a consistent dialogue rather than a one-off process that was done between COP21 to 24. Sorry, not COP21. I'm kind of aging too much here. So the Fijian COP, and from there to the Polish one, that was the 1-year cycle. But the idea would be to adapt it and duplicate it and use it for the other COPs as well, because the way it was designed was really to bring in the voices of the frontline communities, and especially the human rights angle and aspects into the UNFCCC process. So I think I will leave it to that. If there is any other questions, lessons, or even if people want access to how it was designed, we can make sure that we make that available from the presidency team, and that people can use it together with the UNFCCC to take that process further. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very concise but very detailed proposal, and for being so constructive in thinking how the Talanoa dialogue and the experiences of that process can actually feed into the Global Stocktake that is currently happening. To my surprise, we are now actually 5 minutes before the end, so we do have some time for questions, but I see that all the questions that were asked in the Q&A have actually been answered already by the panelists. So I'm just going to give it a little bit more time to see if other questions still come up. Now is the time we can actually ask them orally to our panelists if you still have any questions. But in the meantime, I will already thank everyone, thank the panelists for being here, for giving such a clear and very constructive interventions. Really, I think this has been, at least for me, very helpful to really see how we can engage meaningfully in the Global Stocktake and what's going to happen in Bonn in June. So thank you so much for your interventions, and also thank you very much for all the participants to this webinar. We will, as you see, it's being recorded webinar. We will also upload it and share it, so you can also share it in your networks with other stakeholder groups, other CSOs, other Indigenous people representatives, grassroots organizations, but also, of course, states and UN organizations that might be interested. Feel free to do so. Thank you so much for being here, and yeah, hope to see some of you or many of you in Bonn, and have a great day. Bye.